Hi everyone, welcome back to GovInsider's Festival of Innovation. I'm Shirley, GovInsider's senior reporter, and I'll be moderating today's session on smart cities, smart nations, and smart world. We're seeing cities get smarter every day, adopting technologies to improve public services and tackle the pandemic. But problems like climate change, digital inclusion, and inequality remain. What are some innovative technologies and approaches that can help cities build back better? And how will partnerships play a role? I'm joined by a brilliant group of innovators today to discuss exactly this. A huge thank you to our partners at Amazon Web Services for making this possible. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up our incredible panelists. We have Dodit Ardian Pancapana, Head of Government and Regional Autonomy Bureau at the Regional Secretariat of West Java Province, Indonesia. We have Kate Sutton, Global Leader and Head of the Regional Innovation Center at the United Nations Development Programme. We have Dr. Lim Keng, Executive Director of the Institute of High Performance Computing at A-STAR. He's also the Executive Director of A-STAR's Artificial Intelligence Horizontal Technology Programme. And last but not least, we have Dr. Ronald Chung, ASEAN Smart Cities Solution Architect Lead, Worldwide Public Sector at Amazon Web Services. Welcome panelists, and thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to dive right into our discussion and begin by looking at how cities can play a role in post-pandemic recovery. Pak Dodit, I want to turn my first question to you. How are West Java cities adopting technology to tackle the pandemic?
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for the question, Shirley. If we see, now today, you maybe hear about Mr. Ridwan Kamil, our governor. He was the mayor of Bandung, and today he became the governor of West Java province. Around 50 million population in West Java, and you can imagine handling 50 million people with a kind of pandemic, is a kind of headache, big headache for every leader in the world, as well as for Mr. Ridwan Kamil. Fortunately, since I follow him since 7 years ago, as he became the mayor of Bandung, he always believed that to tackle kind of problem, to tackle the problem in the city, it could be helped by a kind of technology, the IT. I still remember once when he became the mayor of Bandung, the first step that he made, he construct command center. And today, as this is the third year he became the governor of West Java, he also construct the command center. And from that time on, 1.5 years ago, as the pandemic starts in Indonesia about mid-March 2020, he really pushed the function of command center in West Java to work or maximize the role of command center, and he developed through his team, the IT team, the application named Picobar. The Picobar.com. You can Google that one, and from that application, there are so many features developed one by one, step by step, starting from how to find at the very beginning of the pandemic, how to find the mask, and then how to find the hospital, and finally at the second wave of this pandemic, as the Delta variant came to Indonesia, to West Java, the people really helped by the provision of information, and also the oxygen, the oxygen tubes, and then the information how to get that tubes, the oxygen, and the place, and also so many information, even about donation, about plasma convalescence, donor, and many things. So the point is, by the kind of technology, by the kind of collaboration with many parties, he used only a single application, which is called Picobar, and with many features, then people could get access directly to the information and also to get assisted for many kinds of problems we faced during the pandemic.
Got it. Yeah, definitely, Pak Dodit. We've heard so much about the Picobar application in GovInsider, and we're very excited by it as well. Dr. Lim, I'm going to turn my next question to you. I know you oversee data analytics and AI research in A*STAR. So what is a smart city innovation that has actually caught your eye recently?
Well, thanks, Shirley. I think that digitalization has really been a key enabler, both to overcome and navigate the pandemic, as well as continue to take us beyond the pandemic. So for example, like the virtual meetings that we have now, able to connect people, we are now seeing a lot more digital payment, e-commerce and so forth. So I think one of the interesting experience that we had quite recently is in the area of digital health. Because healthcare traditionally has been a lot more conservative, has been slower to change. But we find that the pandemic is actually driving some systemic changes, particularly in the area of digital healthcare. So to give you one example, so last year, A*STAR collaborated with the local hospitals to look at how do we integrate AI, particularly for chest X-ray diagnostics. And the reason is because we have got overloaded clinicians and radiologists. And then this is where we find that machines can actually support clinicians in order to improve the workflow. So very quickly, we were able to develop and deploy almost in record time, AI solutions combined with X-ray imaging. And we do it by bringing together clinicians, AI experts, security experts, as well as management team. And this has resulted in a very quick implementation within a period of about 2 months. And we subsequently even won some healthcare, and IT awards. So we're actually hopeful that healthcare in particular, digital health, smart health will expand into other areas such as telehealth and so forth, so that we could then usher in a whole new paradigm shift in the area of healthcare. And we're also seeing a lot of other innovations, for example, like the use of 5G in order to improve construction productivity, the use of other technologies in order to facilitate last mile logistics and so forth. So we really think that science and technology could actually both help us to navigate the pandemic, as well as take us to the next level.
Yeah, definitely. And I love what you shared about healthcare, and really want to give a huge shout out to all the healthcare professionals that have really worked on the front lines for us. And even as we talk about post-pandemic recovery, I don't want to miss talking about the need for sustainability and the climate crisis that is happening right now. And Kate, if I could turn this question to you, cities are actually a huge contributor to global emissions. So how can we ensure that cities remain sustainable even as they adopt all these new technologies and innovations?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Shirley, and it's good to be here. I think it's a really good question. I think we've just sort of gone over some of the positives from the pandemic in terms of this kind of incredible innovation dividend which has been driven, and however we've also seen an incredible amount of fatigue in policymakers and populations and business to really as it drags on. And last year was supposed to be the year that we really grabbed the climate challenge by the hands, and this year was again supposed to be the year that we really grabbed that climate challenge by its neck. But unfortunately, this pandemic fatigue has kind of continued on and taken global views away from this. So what do we do, and how do we think about this at the UNDP? I mean, firstly, I think in my role, leading on innovation and digital across the region, innovation and digital are a means to an end, not an end in themselves. It's all about how do we move from something to something. And the climate crisis is the most kind of pressing challenge of our time, in the sense that we need to move from the society that we're in now, driven around consumption and driven around waste and driven around emissions, to a society that is the opposite of that. And to do that, we not only require foresight and anticipation and imagination, and policy change and citizen change and behavioural change, we require technological change too. There had been quite a significant investment in sort of sensor technology around air quality and traffic modelling and demand management in urban centres, that was starting to look at addressing not only measuring emissions, but addressing how emissions can be managed. And I worry, I guess, now that a lot of this funding that was going into this space will now, we need to be, a lot of this funding is gone now because of the pandemic, and we need to really think about how we can continue to drive this investment. So all of this, we've got, and there's still real issues around kind of even tracking where we're up to. How do we get to a net zero city? Well, firstly, you need to measure your level of emissions, and everybody needs to take some responsibility there. It's not just a government problem. So we've got a measurement issue, we've got a management issue, and then we've got a change issue. And fortunately, there are some technologies and systems and solutions, particularly that the UNDP are developing and other partners are developing, that can help solve that. But we're going to need much more investment and radical change to see the transition we need.
Definitely. Thanks so much for sharing that, Kate. And I think it's a very important issue that you raise up. And Ronald, if I could turn my next question to you, we've sort of discussed the challenges from the pandemic and also climate change. And I wonder what is the potential of the cloud, especially in helping citizens recover from the pandemic in a sustainable way?
Thank you, Shirley. So, the role of the cloud technology in powering up the smart cities and to support the post-pandemic recovery is quite significant because, like Dr. Lim have just mentioned, digitalization is one of the key things to support the new normal. So we are getting to the new stage: remote learning, remote workforce, digital payment, etc., etc. And all these applications and solutions need to be backed by compute, storage, etc. So if you need to run all these solutions in on-premises infrastructure or traditional infrastructure, then the carbon footprint generated is going to be, quite significant from that perspective. But if you run all this workload in cloud, because of the economy of scale, we can consolidate a lot of workloads, virtualizations, and also with the ability to scale as needed. So, customers don't need to, run all the services all the time. So they can just turn on and turn off whenever they need, and it can help them to bring down the carbon emission overall. So the more the workloads go to the cloud, then we can benefit from the consolidation effect. And in AWS, we constantly optimize our infrastructure and to make sure that it offers services and at the same time providing a more sustainable environment to the society. So, and as a matter of fact, AWS has committed to achieving 100% renewable energy usage for the global infrastructure, and it is already halfway there as of today. So, I think from technology perspective, cloud could really help to the smart cities or the different countries to go forward with sustainability goals during the post-pandemic recovery.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for sharing that, Ronald. And we've discussed the potential and the innovations in digital technology that can bring us forward. But I also wanted to turn our conversation to issues that are equally important, like digital inclusion and also privacy as we adopt all these technologies. So Dr. Lim, I'm going to turn this question to you. I understand smart cities involve the extensive use of technologies like data analytics and AI. And how can we ensure that privacy and ethics are not compromised as cities use these technologies?
Well, effective smart city solutions would actually require the people, the citizens, to contribute data, and even to sacrifice some form of privacy in order to for co-solutioning to work. So the question is always, where is this fine line between contribution of data versus privacy? And I think this is where it may differ between societies. It depends on culture, readiness, and the trust. And this line is also somewhat dynamic. So I think this is where corporations that develop smart city solutions, the government and the people would really need to come together and ideally tied by this fabric of trust. So to give you one example, take contact tracing, for example. So in Singapore, there is a relatively good level of trust with the government, and so when the citizens are informed about why we need to download the Trace Together app, which is essentially used for contact tracing, and how it is being used for the greater good, especially to stamp out infection clusters, we do not see significant pushback. And so this is where the constant upfront communication is important, and also to mitigate misinformation, mitigate fake news. And very importantly is to be transparent about how the data is going to be used, so as to seek people's privacy concerns. Because the thing is that if there's any misuse and trust get eroded, it is very fragile. It is very, very difficult to build it back. And secondly, from the technologists and the developer point of view, I think the technology really require the developer to put people first, to see how the technology, in AI, in analytics, can really help people, particularly to maximize the human potential. So I think if the developers, really change their view to see how technology can maximize the human potential, how it can create value, this will go a long way in addressing some of these issues related to trust, related to privacy. And I think lastly, and this is where the government, together with the people and the community play a role, is to see how do we create, data governance as well as ethics framework, guidelines and policies. Ideally, co-develop this with the community, customize it to the local content. For example, like in Singapore, we have got the PDPA, which is the Data Privacy Act. We are also developing and maturing the AI governance framework. And all these are all very, very important to both be inclusive and also to educate people who are exposed to technology, educate them about the rights, understanding about the trade-off, so that we build trust over time in order to make sure that we are able to overcome some of these challenges.
Definitely. Thanks so much for sharing that, Dr. Lim. I think you brought up quite a few salient points around trust and transparency and really putting people first. So Pak Dodit, I wanted to find out what's West Java's perspective on this as well. As you build new technologies like a pickle bar, for example, how are you ensuring that there's a trust that is maintained between the government and the citizens, and that you're transparent in the way that technology services are being provided?
Okay. If we compare between West Java, let's say, with other provinces in Indonesia, actually we are leading. We are comparable to Jakarta. Even some people said we are even better than Jakarta in terms of Miss Sutton. She smiles. Yeah. We are even better in Jakarta in terms of IT technology. You know,
you've got to rest yourself. No, you've got to do it.
Yeah, but this is really relative compared to Singapore, of course. You know, we have quite a strong middle class here in the city, but you know, we have 50 million of people in West Java, and about 65% they live in the village. They are villagers. That's why the education also give a very strong influence to the level of the trust of the people. But sometimes, you know, people in the village, you know, for example, talking about, let's say, vaccination, you know, there are so many talks about vaccine, you know, vaccine types, where they come from, you know. In the very beginning of the vaccination process, we still remember that some local leaders they don't trust the vaccine process, you know. But then as the Delta variant came, you know, it is kind of a game changer, really a game changer. But if we talk about the government and then the PICOBAR itself, and then the trust of the people to the formal source of news, I think the people in West Java, especially, they still trust PICOBAR, because what we do, we always cooperate with many parties, and the data taken came from the roots. Every week we collect the data from the village. That is why the data came from the level from neighborhood, and then to the village, to the sub-district, to the district, and then to the city, to the region, and then finally to the province. It is always checked. But sometimes, you know, even the local leader, the region, you know, they have a kind of political dimension as well. If it is seen the data, let's say the data of COVID zones, it gets red. You know, sometimes they try to hide, even they try to hide the data itself. And to be honest, sometimes we can hear as well that they try to hold several numbers of infection, for example, and then finally they put the data on the next week or on the next month to make the data more smooth, something like that. That kind of thing sometimes gives the people also reluctancy to believe the level of trust to the data itself. But what I believe, and what we feel and what we know so far, PICOBAR is still trusted by the people, because let's say if they want to get information about oxygen, the main source that they want to get is from PICOBAR as well. If they want to get medication, they also want to get the info from PICOBAR. So far, maybe let's say about 80%, 90% people still trust the source from the government.
Definitely. Thanks so much for sharing that, Pak Dodit. And you know what really strikes me from our conversations thus far is that, you know, technology has really been the bridge between governments to deliver services to citizens within the pandemic. But there's also the issue of digital inclusion, where you know, perhaps some citizens in certain areas of the country don't have the devices that they need or the connections that they need. And Kate, I want to turn this question to you. In your role at UNDP, how are you working to increase digital inclusion and to ensure no one is left behind, as you know, governments and cities use technology as the medium to provide services?
Yeah, thanks for that question, and it's a really important one. I mean, we shouldn't really just develop technology for the sake of developing technology. You know, it's about changing something. transforming an education system, making a healthcare system more affordable and equitable, solving the climate crisis, and I think sometimes when we talk about digital and technology and smart cities, we kind of forget that, actually, what are we trying to do here? And COVID, unfortunately, has really, increased inequality and really shown this digital divide. I think we've talked about the digital divide for a long time, and now we can see it starkly. So what do we do? What do we do at the UNDP to try and deal with that? And thanks for saying leave no one behind, because that's our motto, and that's what we work towards. So in a few areas, obviously digital access and digital skills, so being able to engage, having devices, being able to access technology, so being able to have access to the internet. So the whole suite of what access means is actually quite complex and requires a systemic approach. And then on top of that, going back to kind of trust, ensuring that there's representation and transparency in government data. So it's not just about you can trust the government, it's actually having transparency built in. Really working on ensuring, co-creation, going back to some previous points of having citizens included in development, and it not just being the kind of bastion of the technologists pushing stuff out to people. Coming back to, inclusive innovation being a strategic policy imperative, and more than ever before, this is vital. So often innovation kind of happens outside of communities. It happens to communities, whereas the best innovations, we saw this at the very beginning of the pandemic. The greatest innovations, the community innovations, they were able to respond faster than governments were to this crisis. And so it's only right that a government, and the UNDP supports this, really sees this part of sustainable ongoing policy. We saw that the state played a fundamental role in addressing the crisis. So the state needs to play this kind of shaping and platform role going forward, but ensuring, digital literacy at kind of all points. And that includes, helping people being able to use these apps, being able to get this information. We talked about misinformation. What is it? 70% of misinformation moves 70% quicker than true stories. We know that this is a problem. So we've got some huge sort of, with these dividends, with all of this incredible opportunity, we have to embed, data and rights, human rights and ethics, inclusivity and inclusive innovation at its core. And I really love hearing about, building that kind of people-first technology. That's exactly what this next generation of technological development is going to need to look like for us to be able to really solve these huge challenges ahead of us.
Definitely. Yeah, Kate, I really like what you said about making sure that the citizens are brought along in this journey, and that's something that I actually want to touch on later as we discuss the role of partnerships. So I want to hear from the private sector, from Ronald, about how you're working with governments to actually develop smart cities to help them recover from the pandemic. Can you share like a particular example that comes to mind?
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Well. Sorry about that. Yeah. Well. Yeah. We do have some examples. I like Kate earlier discussing about the digital inclusion and no one left behind. So let's say in Singapore the Trace Together. So I think from digital inclusion perspective, I think we start off from the goal. Well, what's the purpose of Trace Together? The Trace Together is to get to know whether people are close to each other or in the vicinity of each other when there are some detected cases for the COVID. And so in order to achieve this goal, what should we do? Are we just doing a mobile phone app, or we are doing some other thing that serve the purpose as well? And that is exactly the case like in Singapore. We have, of course, mobile app to serve this purpose, but citizens who are not familiar with mobile apps or senior people, they are offered the choice of having the Trace Together token. So it's a token that you can tape on the entry so that you can have, it basically serve the same purpose. Or if token is not available, you can still use your IC card, your ID card to serve the same purpose. So that the whole spectrum of the citizens can participate in this kind of initiative and no one's left behind from that perspective. And on the other hand, well, let's say in Amazon here, we have call center solution, contact center solution. So it is a cloud solution offering in the cloud that support call center. So during the pandemic situations, people can call into the government agencies for support. And you know, running a call center is expensive and it is not easy to establish. But cloud here, from that perspective, can easily help you to spin up a contact center in minutes. And it is easy to configure, and it supports the throughput, it scale with the volume of the call or scale down as needed. So it can help in this regard to support the pandemic situation as well as the post-pandemic recovery. There are actually a lot more initiatives going on, and some of them not only in Singapore, but also for supporting some other ASEAN countries, but we cannot discuss it publicly as of today. But essentially, there is a lot of things going on, and cloud can actually help them in this regard. And but I truly believe that by working backwards from the ultimate goal to achieve, then we can work along the way how to cater the suitable solutions for different spectrum of citizens, age group, different education level, different digital accessibility, etc., etc.
Definitely. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Ronald. And I think what's really crucial here as we look to all these big issues of the pandemic and climate change is really the role of partnerships. And like governments can't do it alone, the academia can't do it alone, and the private sector can't do it alone. So Pak Dodit, I actually want to find out how is West Java working with international organizations and also the private sector to recover from the pandemic.
When several days ago, my team told me that, Dodit, you should represent Mr. Ridwan Kamil to discuss it here. And when I heard, this is about Singapore, from Singapore, then I remember, several months ago, Mr. Governor, during this pandemic, one organization, they came to his residence and discussed very intensely. And finally, after several months, they decided to assist the problem of West Java, how to make a kind of economic recovery. And finally, nowadays, there are already several places set up as a center of, let's say, SME, a center of SME in several villages in West Java. Maybe you know the name of the organization from Singapore. It is Shopee. Shopee.
Yes.
It is Shopee. We our government, since the leadership of Mr. Ridwan Kamil is very open with cooperation. Many times he works with ADB, with Asian Development Bank, and several times as well they work with some international organization, as well as you maybe know about the program of Sister Province. Several months back, we work with our sister province in Japan, from Shizuoka Prefecture, and to be honest, there are hundreds of companies and factories in Karawang, one of the city in West Java. They are affiliated to Shizuoka, and they're really helpful to the people of West Java, people of Karawang, Purwakarta, and the region, assisting the government and the people to tackle the problem of COVID-19. And also several months back, there is one organization from Australia. I think, Kate, you are from there, right? No, sorry.
You've made a diplomatic error there, but I'll forgive you. I'm coming to visit West Java, and you can make up for it. I'm from New Zealand.
Yeah, one organization from Australia, they assist us to trace with the technology, to trace the people who got COVID-19. And then finally, from that time on, we developed those applications, and they work with our national telecom, our international telecom company, and so far, along with Picobar, now it works. So we are really open for kind of cooperation to tackle the COVID and for the economic recovery.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Pak Dodit. And another partnership that I also want to touch on, we've talked about international partnerships, we've talked about partnerships with the private sector, and I think we also want to touch on partnerships with citizens, and something that Kate, you have mentioned earlier. So Kate, what's your perspective on how governments can actually encourage citizens to innovate and to bring them along in this journey as we recover from the pandemic?
Thanks for that. Well, there's quite a few different ways. I mean, I don't know about what happens in West Java, and I'm sorry about this, but I do know in Jakarta they have a very good system where you can sort of track and report, what's going on in your city, and that's got very high levels of citizen engagement. And I think that's the start, right? Asking people to kind of be engaged and to take kind of responsibility and shared responsibility for what's happening in their city. And smart city innovations can help you do that. I know in Hanoi as well, there's a variety of, they've got a smart city compact where they've developed ways of engaging citizens with that. But I think, there are ways of developing kind of inclusive innovations through sort of prizes and challenges and systems approaches and ways of kind of scaling good stuff that's already going on, as well as it just being a kind of one-way government to citizen or citizen reporting back kind of approach. And some of the work we've been doing recently in Da Nang in Vietnam, for example, around taking Vietnam from being dealing with a waste problem to dealing with to becoming a circular city. So having circular at its heart not only requires kind of citizen engagement, and we've engaged with the private sector and civil society and academia and developed a portfolio of solutions to take the city on that transformational journey. And many of those are technological, basic things like smart waste bins and sorting of waste, but also we're trying to take waste out of the system. And we know that AI technology can help with design, it can help with efficiency at the very beginning to ensure that waste doesn't enter the system. So there's some great kind of opportunities here for not just, for these technologies to tackle these huge issues and for citizens to be engaged in that. That does not need to be the domain of an expert. One thing we know is that innovations can come from anywhere. And often they come from the people who are not those domain experts. So government can act as a platform and to engage citizens to solve these problems and to connect them with these technological opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. I love what you said about how innovation can come from anywhere.
Yes.
Yeah. And Dr. Lim, I wanted to circle back on something that you mentioned earlier on how governments need to take a people-first approach in designing technology. Could you perhaps elaborate a bit more on how, in your work at A-Star, as you develop data analytics and AI solutions, how do you apply that approach in your work?
Well, there are many examples in which we sort of take a people-first approach by really working with our partners, understanding some of the challenges and the problems which they face, and then developing the technology for that challenge. So rather than a technology push, but to really come from the problem sort of pool perspective. And there are many examples in which we For example, like we worked with our Housing Development Board. So the Housing Development Board, HDB, so they oversee public housing in Singapore. And one of the problem statement is how do we develop solutions in which we could very intelligently design the urban environment for greater thermal comfort, for lower noise pollution, for lower solar irradiance, and how do we design it in a very intelligent manner before we do any physical construction. And so we partner with HDB to develop a computational modeling tool to help them to develop this so that we could then have much greener cities, much cooler cities that uses less air conditioning, and also to contribute to sustainability and to use it and to use science and technology in order to do this. So another example which I actually personally really like to share is on the area of engaging students, engaging our young to learn about STEM, to learn about some of those big buzzwords like IoT, big data. Because I think just now Kate mentioned about inclusiveness, that innovation can come from anywhere. So a few years ago, we were involved in a project called the National Science Experiment. And we collaborated with the Singapore Science Centre, with the Ministry of Education schools, in which we actually engaged more than 50,000 students from 100 over schools. And then the students would wear these smart sensors as they go about doing their everyday tasks. And then the smart sensors, they measure things like the motion, the temperature, the Wi-Fi based location, humidity, and all that. And the data is then the anonymized data is then wirelessly sent to the cloud. So we then do one step further, in which we develop an AI platform to allow students to analyze the data which they themselves generated, and then to encourage them to undertake projects, innovation projects to analyze those data. And the outcome is really very interesting, because they would use all these tools that we developed to understand about things like geospatial analysis. And for example, the students found that many of their friends and their peers take certain shortcuts from their home to the schools, and then all these are all analyzed visually in a data-driven manner. And then they would then suggest to the authorities that why don't you set up proper walking paths so that we can walk. So we are empowering them to use technology, empowering them to use data, and also educating them about things like carbon footprint, about energy savings if they have walked versus traveling by cars. So this is a really very nice experience, because they learn about all these tools like AI, IoT, and then they are empowered to do this themselves. And then we hope that through this kind of initiative, we can encourage more students to go into STEM, to go into using technology to empower and then to help the society.
Wow, that's really, really fantastic. Really making innovation start from the young minds in Singapore. That's brilliant. Yeah, and we're just reaching the final minutes of our session. So I wanted to do a quick fire round to sort of end our session off on a positive note. So my question to all of our panelists here is, what are you hopeful for in the next year? And perhaps, Ronald, we can start with you.
Yep, thank you, Shirley. Well, first of all, I hope the pandemic situation will be gone for good in the near future, so that everyone can go back to normal and people can fly again. And maybe next year we can do this kind of in-person event again. And but having said that, well, for the next year, from my perspective, we would really like to work with different governments, agencies, and to see how we can help them to fast track the post-pandemic recovery by delivering the most suitable solutions to deliver the most suitable outcomes for different countries.
Yeah, definitely. Pak Dodit, would you like to go next? What are you hopeful for in the next year?
Yes, next year pandemic ends. Next year I'd like to deliver the dream of my son. Would like to go to the Europe. You know why? Why he wants to go to Europe, and then why I really support him. Because to open the mind is very important for everyone, very important for humanity. Starting from a kind of discussion, we know each other, and then after we know each other, we try to cooperate, and then we help each other. So to solve this global pandemic, we need to do the global work. So global cooperation, not only it is only a starting. It is only a starting. We discuss, we talk, but I really hope next month, next year, I could see everyone maybe come to Bandung. We work together, and then also we come to Singapore. We work together to solve our problems.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. I really hope for that as well. Kate, would you like to go next?
Thank you. So for me, we've been dealing with the pandemic, and we've been dealing with the climate crisis like they're national problems. We think about how our nation has responded and what our national contribution to the climate emissions are, and how many vaccines my nation has given, my people. And the reality is that both of these issues are global issues. The pandemic will not be over for me until it's over for everyone. The climate crisis will not be over for me until it's over for everyone. For me, this is a moment, my hope is that the fatigue does not drain us and does not set in, and that we don't go back to normal, that we go to new normal, or that there's no new normal. We do something completely different. Because drastic change is needed, and that kind of global solidarity is needed. And my hope is that global funders come together and appreciate this moment that we're in, and invest what's required to make sure that everybody's vaccinated, to make sure we can end this pandemic. It's not just about ending it for me, it's about ending it for everyone. And that we can end this climate crisis, or we can at least get below 1.5 degrees, and we are not there yet, and so we've got work to do. Those are my hopes, and I think if we think about it, and if we take deliberate action, and we're strategic, and we invest, we can do it.
Yes, I believe we can do it as well. Dr. Lim, how about you?
Well, I think I echo everyone's view that I think we can't wait for life to go back to normal, or the new normal. And I think that the pandemic has really demonstrated the value of smart city solutions, open innovation, to positively impact people's life, even in the midst of this particular crisis, both to connect people and services using digitalization, and also bringing about a greater awareness about sustainability and climate change, which is an even more dangerous threat to our world than the pandemic. And then also about how science and technology can really play a very key role to help policymakers to decide on decisions to navigate out of this pandemic. So I'm very hopeful that that open innovation, science and technology will continue to create an impact even more. And also to inspire more of our younger generations to take up STEM, so as to lead us into the future. And I hope to see everyone physically.
Yes, fantastic. Okay, I think that's a really great note to end our session on today. And thank you so much, everyone here, for sharing your insights. It's been such a wonderful discussion. Yeah, so that's all we have time for, but we do have another session right after this on the future of work. So we'll be hearing from Rahul Daswani, Head of People and Culture at Singapore's Open Government Products, and Shazli Zain, Research Assistant at the Institute of Policy Studies at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. They'll be joined by Kuan Hian Tan, editor of the Birthday Book 2021. So do stay tuned, and we hope to see you there. Goodbye.